as a young leader, like I would go into a store like guns ablazing, and like if somebody wasn't like following me, I would get rid of them.
Yeah.
And that's not the best way to do it.
Hey, welcome back. Today we have Scott Hayes with not behavioral analytics, but he is with Synergistic Systems, and they do behavioral testing for human resources, companies, individuals. Anyway, we're going to hear a little bit about his backstory and how they help people in West Michigan. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks for having me, Eldon.
Yeah, of course.
This is cool. I've been here a couple of times, but I didn't realize that we were doing all this whole podcast thing in here.
Yeah, new this year. We're mostly, you've been here for networking and happy hours and that. So
Yeah.
glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you first, or yeah, go ahead.
A little bit about me. So you mentioned Synergistic Systems. That's the company I work with. And it's been a journey to get there. So I'll give you want the whole backstory,
Yeah,
the way back?
Let's go. Let's do way back. Little Scott.
Oh man. So I grew up in Lowell.
Okay.
Originally, so not too far from here. Was never really sure what I wanted to do in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just growing up trying to figure things out. And I thought I wanted to be a police officer.
Okay.
I thought that was my calling. So I ended up going to Grand Rapids Community College. I took courses in basically getting my gen eds to try to get into the academy. And when I got in there, there was a bunch of like just people that I was like, I don't really feel like this is me. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And I was already like 2 years in. So what do you do with that, right? So at the time, I ended up finishing my associates at GRCC and then transferring all my credits into Grand Valley, and changed my direction a little bit. Okay. So instead of going into the law enforcement piece, Grand Valley at the time had what they call the private security portion of that. So it's still a criminal justice degree, but it was more like the private security sector. So I kind of was going into that and was like, what am I going to do with that? I have no idea. Right.
Yeah, I don't even know.
But a lot of sociology classes, a lot of like gen eds and stuff were still in there.
Yeah.
And at the time I had enough college credits to be able to substitute teach.
Okay.
So I was like 20 something years old and I was substitute teaching at a high school. And one of my friends was coaching high school wrestling over at Belding, and asked me one day, like, would I want to come help him be his assistant coach? And I was like, heck yeah, that sounds cool. So I was a 20 something year old kid with enough college credits to substitute teach and help coach high school wrestling. So that's kind of my job.
Yeah. Were you a wrestler too?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
I wrestled, obviously.
Yeah. I
Just
figured
know anything about it.
like, yeah.
No, so I ended up substitute teaching and helping him coach wrestling at Belding.
Awesome. One thing I'll say, wrestlers, like always the best.
I thought you were gonna say they're crazy.
No, well, they're crazy too, but I found them to be the best, often the best teammates, very hardworking, dedicated, and like from an employee standpoint, or somebody I want to work with.
Yeah.
Like if I see wrestler, it's usually a big plus because the best football players on our team
I'll take
are
that.
wrestlers, and some of the just the hardest working. And it's just you got to take a beating. You got to work so hard to make weight, and there's just so many things that go into it.
It teaches you a lot about life.
Yeah.
Because there's always somebody bigger and tougher.
Yeah.
And it might not be your day, but you still got to go out there and compete. And sometimes not getting pinned is a win, and if you can save enough team points and helps the team, that's a big deal. But so I was pretty good at wrestling over at Lowell, which is a big wrestling community.
Nice.
I think it's 10 or 11 state titles now in a row.
Oh, wow.
Pretty awesome. And I actually, when I was coaching, got more enjoyment out of the kids going out and wrestling and watching them raise their hand, because when I would go out on the mat and win, I raised my hand like, that's cool. But when they were going out on the mat, it was like I won, 20, 30 times a night.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what was really cool about that whole coaching piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, why don't I just become a teacher, right?
Sure.
2 years in. And then a lot of the teachers, when I would talk to them, they were like, man, I'm broke. I don't know if I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And then I was like, well, shoot, if they're complaining about it, like, I don't know if I want to be a teacher anymore.
Right.
So I stuck with my degree, and I ended up getting my degree in criminal justice and business
Okay.
from Grand Valley.
Sure.
Okay. Right. So what do you do with that?
No idea.
So my first job out of college after I graduated was catching shoplifters
Okay.
for Gap, Banana Republic, and Old Navy.
Kind of fits, I guess.
Yeah. So I used to go around in plain clothes, like catch people stealing.
You tackle them and on
Nope.
a door. No.
No, you're not allowed to tackle people. And
Yeah.
I think it's way different now than it was that many years ago.
Yeah.
But no, it was hands off, and now it's,
Sure.
hey, come back. We need to talk about stuff that you took. And,
Yeah.
but that's what I did. And I was pretty good at it, and thought that was what I wanted to do. But then I have been punched in the head more times than I can remember. I've been maced. I've been bit. I've even got stabbed with a screwdriver.
From doing that job?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I imagine it's got to be tough having those conversations too, or you work on your skills to try to de-escalate to avoid some of that.
Yeah.
I
And
don't know.
after I got stabbed, so I went to stop him, like
Yeah.
get in front of him, and he like went to throw a haymaker at me. So I ducked and I pushed him, and he went through a plate glass window, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Right.
Wow.
Well, then he got up and he had a screwdriver in his back pocket, which is what they would use to like pop sensor tags off of the merchandise. And it hit me in the back like 2 or 3 times before I ended up wrestling him right back down to the ground.
Yeah. Wow.
And held his arm out until a customer like came and like pulled it from him. And literally at that point, I was like, this guy's not getting away. Like I will lose my job or whatever I have to do. Like this guy's not getting away. He's going to jail.
Yeah.
And cops came, took care of him. But at that point, I was like, well, I don't know if I want to do this forever either, right? So I had a district manager at the time from Old Navy that basically said, if you ever get sick of doing that loss prevention piece, let me know. I'll make you a store manager. And I was like, that sounds like something I could probably do, right?
Yeah.
So after that happened, I was like, I'll take them up on it. So took them up on it. They made me an assistant store manager at first and did a really good job at it, to the point where they promoted me to a store manager really quickly. And it was one of those things where it kind of was like the coaching piece, where now I was in charge of people again, and I was coaching, motivating, training, and developing people.
Yeah.
And not having to like bounce around and, help do all these different stores or whatever. But I was, it was like that 30 different wins, everybody raising their hand. You know what I mean? Like that made me feel good inside. So there was something that I was missing from doing the loss prevention. So I was grateful for that. And then it became really good at it. Made me a store manager at one location, and then I got put into a higher volume location, and just continued to do a good job at that. And then Dick's Sporting Goods made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I went over to Dick's Sporting Goods for several years over in the Rivertown location.
Yeah.
Took it from an $11 million building to a $15 million building. A bunch of managers, 100 to 120 employees at times, just depends. Multi-floor, 90,000 square foot building. But that was kind of cool for me because it was a bunch of athletes. I mean, I had former NFL football players on my staff, college baseball players. There's some really cool people. Got to meet that. But the one thing that you realize when you're doing that stuff is it's very time consuming, and
As in,
it's a grind. I mean, I was spending a lot of time there. And one of the breaking points for me in retail was I missed my oldest son's first T-ball game.
okay.
And I was like, man, something's got to change. Like, I can't do this. My parents were at every single one of my games. I have to be there. It's a really big deal to me. So something had to change. And along each step of the way, every company that I had been with had used something different to measure like people, dynamics, team dynamics, that sort of thing. With Old Navy, we used like strength finders. With Dick's Sporting Goods, we used DISC for like an assessment. which were behavioral tools. But it wasn't until I found the predictive index that I was like, there's no way. Like, this thing is literally 2 questions. It takes about 6 minutes to do,
Yeah.
and it's pretty spooky accurate. So after I found that, I sent it to all of my former assistants.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is pretty neat. Like, I wish I'd had this a lot sooner. So that's kind of, I mean, that's my gateway into the whole doing what I'm doing now piece. Is I kind of fell into it, and I reached out to one of the PI partners, Synergistic Systems, and I was like, hey, if you guys are ever looking for somebody, please let me know. I'd love to come help you. And they were like, actually, you're behaviorally wired to do what we need you to do. And I was like, just tell me more. And basically, I mean, really what it boils down to is, and for companies and all companies and organizations, is it's a really big deal to make sure that you're putting somebody that's behaviorally wired to do the job to where they don't have to behave any differently than what comes natural to them.
Yeah.
So they feel good doing it.
Right.
And if in my journey, it's where I naturally felt comfortable was in that leadership type role where I'm coaching, motivating, training, and developing people. Like, that's where I feel best.
Well, just getting to know you, that's, over the last few years, that's kind of where it's very obvious that's the case as well. So, so what does that look like in terms of what you offer? Like, how does your interaction work when you're helping these companies out? Like, what's kind of a lead in? I obviously sent you, you came, and when we first met, it was through a mutual friend. You offered to do the testing with us. It was great. Learned a lot. We had a conversation. And then, even recently I connected you with a friend of mine who's in operations, and, he took the test, was very excited about things he learned about himself, and which is sort of both exciting and sad at the same time that, he's almost, he's in his late 40s and, just kind of learning some of these things about himself.
Yeah. So I could spend all day on this question. Like, this is crazy. So how does it work as far as like what companies use it for? So as far as what most companies utilize Predictive Index for is it's more like a talent selection tool. Okay. So like finding the right person and knowing who that person is before I even bring them in to the organization, because I want to make sure that they're behaviorally wired to do the job and do it for a long period of time to where they feel good. And what happens then? They stay with you and they stay longer, right?
Yeah.
So, and they feel better when they go home. They're not as de-energized. And we've all worked for companies that, like, we go home and we're like, oh man, like, this sucks.
Oh yeah. And so for companies, it's like, I know that's expensive. I mean, turnover is hugely expensive. You got the cost of, retraining somebody because they just weren't happy. It wasn't a good fit. You got looking for somebody else in the hiring process again, or sometimes even worse, suffering for a year or two with somebody that's not very productive.
Added workload to everybody else, morale. Yeah. I mean, there's so many components to that whole turnover piece that it's a lot. So turnover is really expensive is what it really boils down to.
Right.
So I tell people that not if, but when I save you from making one bad hiring decision, it pays for itself for a decade. Yeah. It's a little bit of an investment up front, but knowing that you're bringing in the right people to do that role is a big deal, right? But more importantly than that is where I'm really finding things since the Great Resignation. Everybody remembers that recently, right?
Yeah.
And where I'm seeing companies pivot to now is, now that we have these people, how do we keep them?
Yeah.
That's a really big deal, right? Well, if I know how you are behaviorally wired, I can, as a leader, I can give you what you need in order to be and feel successful, to where you're like, man, that Scott guy, I really like him. Like, he's a great boss. And that's where we prescribe to what we call the platinum rule versus the golden rule when it comes to management. And everybody knows the golden rule, right? Do unto others as I'd want them to do unto me.
Right.
Doesn't work anymore. We've kind of done it to ourselves, right? We've given people trophies just for participating.
Sure.
So we've done it to ourselves. We prescribe to what we call the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they need. Because you need something different from me, who needs something different from every other person. And again, this is where we tailor our approach to our people. So we have a better cohesive environment where everybody works well together and there's good morale, employee engagement, just a better team environment.
Right. Makes sense for sure. We were recently speaking with Brent Case at The Right Place and here on the podcast. And, I didn't realize that 85% of what they do is working with local companies to employee retention, employee improvement, and, processes, just really trying to make them stronger while they're here. And it just seems like a common theme here recently.
Yeah. So the one thing I do have to correct you on though, is you keep calling it a test.
Yeah. Well, that's my experience with it. So it's not the back end,
Yeah.
I see the test part.
So it's not really a test, okay?
Sure.
Because a test assumes that there's a right and a wrong. And with predictive index, there is no right or wrong. You just have more or less of a particular drive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference. So we always call it an assessment or a survey.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
So not a test.
I get it. Survey, test, assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's literally 2 questions. It's 86 adjectives. So it's kind of like a word association. And you're going to select the adjectives that you do because they resonate with you. And it really gives us a good indicator of who that person is. We call it a free choice stimulus response assessment versus what like DISC, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, almost all those other tools that are on the market are what we call a forced choice stimulus response assessment. And what I mean by that is those ask you a question and then they say A, B, C, and D, which one are you? Well, I might not be like any of them, but so it forces me to pick one.
Right.
And what I've also found with those is if I'm going to work for a company that's like very competitive, dominant, and driven, guess what? I can answer those questions.
Right.
Competitive, dominant, and driven. So with the predictive index, we tend to get more of an accurate depiction of who somebody is, and it's because of that free choice part.
Well, I've noticed that in the different tests I've taken or assessments.
Touché.
However, where I'm looking at them and I'm a little bit analytical and I'm looking at it, how do they want me to answer, or what is this going to say? So I'm looking
Sure.
a step or two ahead at what I think they're going to be looking at from that. And I'm sure many other people do. So,
yeah. And that's why, so because it's so short and simple, when people are done with it, they're like, that was it. Like, it's holy cow. So because of that, we get, like I said, more of an accurate depiction of who somebody is. And then, we use that to put them in the right spot in the organization.
So how does that, so what else is involved here? Because from, from something that's 2 questions in a short response, what's the value outside of that, that you guys bring to the company in terms of interpretation or, application? What else do you do aside from just the assessment?
So there's 3 pieces to the solution. So the first one is the behavioral assessment. It takes about 6 minutes, 5 minutes, spooky accurate. The second piece is what we call a job assessment. And the job assessment's given to 3 to 5 people in the organization. So an incumbent or an employee, if you will, that's just knocking it out of the park. Their manager, a manager once removed, HR, and an executive over that functional area.
Okay.
And then what we do is we come to a consensus on what the behavioral requirements are for that role. Yeah. That's kind of like the secret sauce. I hate using that word, but that's the secret sauce.
Well, it's a good way to put it, because I'm like, how do you fit it together?
Yeah.
It's one thing to know, and then it's the other thing to like fit it in the puzzle where it best fits.
Yeah. So there would be a different job pattern, if you will, for every single role within an organization. And then I know if somebody looks like that job pattern that we've created, that they don't have to behave any differently than what comes natural to them to do that job, to where you're going to get all of their mental stamina. So they feel good doing it and they'll do it for a long period of time.
Yeah.
If they're wired completely opposite, and I've seen this happen a lot, especially with people that I went to school for 4 years or 6 years and I got a degree and this is what I want to do. We'll just use accounting as an example. So I got my accounting degree, and now I'm an accountant. And then they get in there and they're like, this is awful. Who would ever want to be an accountant? So again, like that's what we try to identify before we bring somebody into the organization. Otherwise, might hire this person because they interview really well. and they sound like a perfect candidate. And what we found is that people are closest to perfection 2 times in their entire life on their resume, because
Sure.
they're fluffing it up,
Right.
trying to make it look really good,
Yep.
and during the interview, because they're telling you everything they think you want to hear, right? So this takes that the guesswork out of it, or and it just allows us to put some science and data behind making the hiring decision.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So that's the second piece, is that job
Mhm.
assessment. And then the third piece is what we call a cognitive assessment. And that's a timed 12-minute assessment. It's a series of verbal, numerical, and abstract reasoning questions. And it measures general cognitive ability.
Okay.
So what that is so think of it's like a cousin of IQ. So think of IQ as like the size of a sponge.
Okay.
What general cognitive ability is how quick and fast that sponge absorbs.
Okay.
So it's what it tells us is that person going to be able to learn quick, be able to pick up the role easily. And I don't know about you, but I've hired people, and I'd bring them into the organization. They were a great interview. And then 6 months later, 9 months later, a year later, I'm like, how in the heck do they not understand what they need to do? Like, they've been here for this long now. Generally, that's somebody with a lower cognitive score. Doesn't mean they're not going to get there. It just takes them a little bit longer. So you need to be a little bit more patient with them. And then on the flip side, I've also brought people in that at the end of the first week, they were just like rock stars. And I was always like, man, I don't know what that person has, but like if I could bottle that up and sell it, I'd probably be a millionaire.
Right.
And that's generally somebody with a higher cognitive score. It just means they hit the ground running, they learn at an accelerated rate, and it's just easier for them to figure things out.
Now, have you found any trends over the years? I guess I don't even know if that's something that would make sense. It's just something that came to mind. I've seen people that, again, they might learn real quickly, they might plateau real quickly,
Yeah.
or they might take a little bit longer to learn, but then they kind of have it.
Yes.
Like, they learn quickly. Sometimes they forget quickly, if you will. Again, maybe that's not what the test measures, but I've seen people kind of, they got it, but then, as they have to add to their plate, some of that stuff falls off, where other people take a little longer, they go a little deeper.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we are too, right? So like, there's certain roles that you don't need to be able to learn at super accelerated rate. So like bringing somebody in that's too high of a cognitive score, they learn so quick and easy that they get bored because of it. So while they might be 100% fit to roll, they might phase out because of that.
Sure.
So yeah, you need to take that into consideration.
Well, you have 3 parts instead of 1.
Yeah.
Imagine. So interesting.
Yeah. So that's honestly, that's our whole solution. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And for me, it's just exciting helping companies and organizations build a tighter team dynamic.
Mhm.
And one of the cool tools that we have in the system is what we call a one-on-one relationship guide.
Okay.
And it's where we can put 2 people up against each other. So like I could put me and you in there,
Okay.
and we can see where we have strengths together, where we have cautions, and also tips on how to preserve that relationship. Yeah.
That's super interesting to
So
me.
when we get into like where
Yeah.
we're working for the same company, and which always gets me is like, we're working for the same company, why are we butting heads?
Yeah.
Usually what it is that we're amiss on one or more of our drives.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So the easiest relationships that you're ever going to have are when people are behaviorally wired just like you. They just get you, they just understand you. It's just easier. I could throw you into a room of 100 different people, and you will naturally start to gravitate towards the people who are like you.
I could see that.
It just flows. It's just easy. You don't have to explain yourself. It just feels right. The most difficult relationships that you're ever going to have are when people are behaviorally wired opposite you.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've seen, you can just tell when you start talking to people. You work in a room in a networking thing, and it's just like, oh man, I'm moving over here because it's not comfortable. At the same time, I may have a friend that, they're same, and I would traditionally call that personality, but it's much of, it's too narrow, or it's not a good term in my view.
Okay.
I know a lot of people call them personality tests over the years, but I think they do different things. And so they might put you in a block
Yeah.
of, some of the traditional ones with the quadrants, but
Sure.
you can definitely, especially once you're aware of it.
Yeah.
If you've never been made aware of this kind of thing, then it's easy to just wonder. But it's been so helpful for me in my career to kind of understand some of these behavioral things and understand that, okay, I might have to mirror or match this person a little bit. It's not my natural conversation, but to get through here, we're going to have to like speak a little bit more of their language, which isn't necessarily comfortable.
Yep.
But most of the time, if I'm given a choice, I'm going to end up wandering around and find somebody that I just connect with differently, more similarly.
Or it feels right.
Yeah.
But those people that are different than you, that's where synergy can be, right? But like you're saying, like if I don't know that about that person, when we don't know something about somebody, we tend to fill that void with negative space. Well, I don't like them. They're different than me. What this does, it allows us to see where we're strong together, where we're going to have cautions, where we're going to butt heads a little bit, and tips on how to preserve that relationship.
I think I didn't even realize that existed. It makes a ton of sense because I see it in business partnerships and
no, I will not put your wife in there and do the two of you. So
like you see where people are complementary, many cases where it's helpful, but to kind of break that down into different aspects, which I'm not familiar with how the assessment works and how the program, but makes a ton of sense and it seems super valuable.
So again, we're working for the same company. Why are we butting heads, right? Put them in there, we sit them down, we go over it with them, and it's usually because we're just a little bit different. So here's how we get past that. And one of the things that I've noticed and what I've been working with all my clients on recently is, how like when you bring somebody in, like a brand new person, and then like 6 months, 9 months, like a year down the road, then all of a sudden we start to get a little frustrated with each other. We butt heads a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we're different, right?
Sure.
Just by sitting that person down and doing that one-on-one relationship guide with that manager and that direct report during the onboarding process eliminates that rub that we would have had 6 months, 9 months, a year down the road.
Sure.
And because what we'll do is I'll get to that cautions and be like, okay, here's where we're strong together, but here's where we're going to butt heads. And oh my gosh, if I ever make you feel this way, please let me know. That's not my intent.
Yeah.
But we know this is going to happen.
That's awesome. I think some of the books I've read over the past few years kind of hit on some of the same principles by Ray Dalio. Like he speaks about such openness, and they do like baseball cards of people's personality and how they work, like, of these different assessment factors. Even just communicating in general, just knowing that there's a place to butt head, even if you don't have the solution. Like if you know that in advance, it's a known now. So there's not the fear, there's not the as much friction in general. Like, it's just the communication. It's like, to me, it's the root of almost all problems in society.
Communication.
Yeah. When it comes to marriage or business or any interactions of any kind, it seems like communication is, but we don't always know how.
It's because we're all different.
Yeah.
And we as humans have a tendency to give what we need. Okay. So if I need to be able to talk my way through something, but you don't, you want to think your way through it. So here I am talking my way to you, and you're like, oh my gosh, can you just stop talking right now? Like this allows us a peek under who each of us are and why we have those needs, why we behave that way.
So interesting to me. I mean, I love this stuff. I've read a lot of, so how does this work? Sorry, did I interrupt something?
No. I was gonna say, so for me, like, helping businesses, helping companies, again, it's like me, going out on the wrestling mat and raising my hand versus, every time a client does this and rolls it out successfully to the organization to where culture's better, turnover's down. Just things are rocking and rolling, and we don't have to worry about that people piece within the organization anymore. Like, that's like my 30 wins a night as a wrestling coach. You know what I mean?
So 2 things before I forget, and we can hit them.
Sure.
At whatever order. But one is, this sounds like it's not much like what I learned with the Right Place. It's not a one-time, hey, we bring a business to town and kind of leave them a go. It's not like you're doing an initial assessment necessarily. It sounds like this is an ongoing process. that maybe you get revisited every now and then
Yeah.
as new people come on throughout the year, or or maybe you like have follow-ups. And then the other one I forgot already.
Yeah, so I'll touch base. I touch base
Yeah.
quarterly. So we're a knowledge transfer company. So we'll
Mhm.
teach the organization everything they need to know about Predictive Index, and basically sit on their bench and help them as they need help. But we would make sure that we do this for all candidates, right?
Mhm.
Because we want to make sure we're getting the right people. But then also all employees, because we want to make sure we identify who each of us are. And the organizations that I've found that have the best cultures are the ones who share their PI patterns with each other,
Yeah.
where the CEO is comfortable going to, the brand new employee that we just onboarded, and sharing his PI pattern with that
Mhm.
new employee, and is like, hey, here's how I'm wired. This is how I am. And, does a little bit of a
Yeah.
read back and shares their pattern with them. So that to me is pretty cool. And it creates that culture of openness. And what you notice then is that the employee engagement, it almost goes through the roof because of that.
I could see that. Like, it's a vulnerability, and it's not, the words I do think are always very important, and not calling it a strength or a weakness
Sure.
as much as a pattern, like a behavioral pattern. And now it's just, there's no negative connotation with it. It's just kind of how
No
the
good or
wire.
bad, no right or wrong.
Right.
Just have more or less of a drive.
Yeah. And it might fit differently in a certain aspect versus another. So,
Yeah.
and we all have our different, I'd still call it strengths and weaknesses, but it's probably not the best
And
language.
sometimes it's good to know that weakness.
Yeah.
Because, like, for myself, I'm not super detail oriented. You either?
Probably not. I can be, and I think deeply into details,
Yep.
but I don't want to have to spend a lot of time on.
It's not your highest and best use, right?
Right.
So sometimes we can use that opportunity to leverage somebody else to help us with it. And creating self-awareness is really what we're after, is
Sure.
making people a little bit more self-aware in who they are, and where they might have some opportunities that they could leverage maybe somebody else to help them with.
And I'm learning so much here, like imagining from a company of even just the interactions I have with different people here at the podcast, with the production assistants and guests and that, but to have a company of 20 to 50 people or more, being able to optimize how they all fit together seems just crazy valuable to me. I don't know. I've been, I came from the corporate world many years ago, and some of them worked great in little pieces and departments, but oftentimes it was just very segregated, like a lot of groups. On a team, you have certain people, whether you call them cliques or whatever, they just they don't tend to communicate with these other groups.
Yeah.
And sometimes that involves leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, leadership, and then you got different teams, and they might be button heads.
Yeah.
To me, it seems super valuable.
I wish I would have had this a lot sooner in my career.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I'm pretty good at reading people.
Yeah.
Like, I just naturally wired that way to read people and get a good gut feeling of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But as a young leader, like, I would go into a store like guns ablazing, and like, if somebody wasn't like following me, I would get rid of them.
Yeah.
And that's not the best way to do it, right? So it took me several years to figure that out. And we all suffer a little bit from what we call the halo effect.
Okay.
You know what that is?
I've heard of it, and I'm trying to remember what it is. So please explain.
I like me. So
Yeah.
guess what I do? I hired a bunch of me's.
Right.
Not always the best. So you need a diverse environment, diversity of thought, and people from all backgrounds to, pick up on the detail stuff that I had a hard time with, and I could do it, but it would take me longer. It would drain me. And so I wish I'd had a lot sooner. I would have done a few things differently.
Yeah. I remembered, I think, what the other one was. So do you have maybe a case study or a success example, or something maybe in the past few years that came up where it kind of stands out?
So, I mean,
I'm putting you on a spot here.
yeah,
So.
no, I have several clients all across the country.
Okay.
So I have tons of, yeah, I'm not just Western Michigan, but so I'm all kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff we can do virtually now, right? So I meet via Zoom or Teams or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. So I have a couple of them. The first one is one of my clients down in Mississippi.
Okay.
They just recently, I was talking to their HR manager of one of the plants down in Mississippi, and in the first half of this year, they just recorded, and this is manufacturing, 200 some employees, and they just recorded a 7% turnover for the first half of the year, which industry average for like manufacturing is like 45% or something crazy like
Really?
that.
Wow.
So for them to be that low is pretty awesome. Like that to me is a big success story. Now, what they do is that because it's manufacturing and they have all these different positions throughout the plant, when somebody applies for a position at their organization, they might not necessarily put them in that position that they applied for.
Okay.
What they do is they sit that person down and they go, "Hey, we know that you applied for this position,
Mm-hmm.
but we think that you're going to be and feel better doing this instead." So they're taking a look at how their candidates are behaviorally wired and saying, "Hey, we think that you're going to be better suited in this type of a role. What do you think?" And to a candidate or somebody who wants to come work for your organization, if this company is really caring about who I am to the point where like they want to make sure I feel good doing the job, like that's a pretty big deal.
That's a big win. I think that's one of the gaps in hiring. Like I've seen this in my kids, even like looking at jobs, and they're just looking for something that sort of fits. They don't necessarily know how they're wired or what they want, but it's a job that they're willing to do, but it might not be the best fit for them.
Right.
And so to me, if a company does something like that, that would be a big green flag, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
To kind of, direct me and definitely keep more interest. It'd be nice if there's a way to maybe integrate that even earlier in the process during the hiring, because it seems like that's sort of a mess right now. And maybe that's through individual, assessments
Yeah.
prior, but
Yeah. And then the other thing that they do is they will, once that person is hired and they put them into that role, then they go over their behavioral pattern with them. So they do over their PI with them, and they make sure that that feels good and like that's 100% them. And yeah, so and then the hiring manager will go over like, here's how I'm wired. That whole like one-on-one relationship guide I was telling about earlier, like that's a big deal, and it creates a culture of openness and trust, like right out of the gate.
that's great. So who's your primary client? Like what kind of people are you looking for?
Yeah, there's really not like an industry or a size or anything like that. I think everybody should be using Predictive Index, but no. In all honesty, people that have the revolving door, where they're like, man, we just need to hire somebody, and they're just hiring people with a pulse. Like that's the wrong way to hire. So I believe in hire slow, fire fast.
Yep.
And sometimes we do it backwards, where we hire fast and then take forever to get rid of them. So people that have that revolving door and they just having trouble finding the right person. For whatever reason, it seems like manufacturing is kind of a slam dunk for me right now.
Sure.
And that's because, remember I said people are closest to perfection 2 times?
Yeah.
On the resume and in the interview. Manufacturing, we try to hire people because they're telling us what they think we want to hear, and we bring them in and then they turn out to be a flop. So what we do is, put some science and data behind that and make sure that that person's going to be able to, do that job over in the corner, working on widgets or doing whatever by themselves for how many hours a day. Some people actually like doing that, where there's certainty, consistency and stability from one day to the next. I couldn't do it because I need to be up and moving around and doing other things. But there's some people that's all they want, just come in and do a good job and go home. So that's a good fit right now. I mean, I even have recruiting firms that are my clients.
Okay.
And they're using it to make sure that they're hiring the right recruiter to come work for them.
Okay.
So I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm envisioning like companies, like especially large companies that hire because of that turnover, making it more of an open-ended offer of employment, if you will.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're doing I don't know, it's not the right way, a blue collar cattle collar, or a white collar cattle collar, or like a management. Like we're looking for, like, we're growing as a company,
Yeah.
and sort of not necessarily
Rapid
specific.
expansion.
Yeah.
Anybody that's growing quick and fast, let's put some science and data behind bringing in the right people so we get the right candidate out of the gate.
Yeah. That's kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So rapid expansion.
Yeah.
Yeah, trucking industry right now. I feel like I've been in a couple of different trucking industries, from like selling semis to the logistics companies. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm kind of all over the board.
Anything new coming on technology wise that's interesting that you guys are working on, or any trends you've seen?
One of the things, so obviously everybody's talking about AI, right? Like AI is everywhere.
I
Yeah,
just
right.
didn't let you hit
So
it.
one of the things that we've done is we've incorporated a little bit of that into what we call a job ad optimizer. So we have the ability now to take your job posting, like what you're going to put on Indeed or Monster or wherever, right?
Sure.
And paste it into our system, and it will tell you if you're going to, using that verbiage that you've pasted in there, if that's going to attract the right candidates.
Makes sense. So you're sort of reverse engineering that word choice thing in a way.
Yeah. So then what we do is then we tailor your job ad to be a little bit more tailored toward that person that you're looking for. So you find higher quality candidates right away.
Sounds great. I love it,
Sign
man.
you up?
I
You ready?
like all of this stuff is kind of like, I don't know. It's sort of one of my very big areas of interest. So
Yeah. It's cool just to know how people are wired though.
Yeah.
So like for me doing this now, so I've been doing this for almost about 6 years now, and I need to know how everybody's wired, like friends, family members. So I help out with the middle school wrestling team now.
Yep.
Go figure. My kids are in middle school now, and I even had to send it to the other middle school wrestling coach because I had to know how he was wired so we could communicate better together.
Yeah.
And it breaks down those barriers and it helps us understand each other in a whole different level.
And your wife loves having these conversations with you, I bet.
No. Apparently I'm loud.
There was sarcasm there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even
We
know your
both
wife.
home office. She's
Yeah.
a photographer. I think you knew that.
Yep.
So she home offices, and she's on the third floor, and I'm in the basement in my office. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, you need to stop. Sometimes it's like a little bit much. Whatever.
A little too excited.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she could probably spit some of this back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, anything else you want to cover?
No. I mean, it's been awesome. Like being here. This is cool.
I've learned so much, and I'm hoping that listeners, viewers do as well. Because to me, anybody, and we hit a lot of business people here, and that have watched and listened so far, and so to me, it's like really valuable stuff.
Yeah, and honestly, business is all about the people.
Yeah,
we wouldn't have business if we didn't have the people. So how do we make work a little bit more enjoyable?
Yeah,
let's figure out how we're all wired and appreciate each other for our, similarities and our differences.
So if somebody wanted to reach out, whether for their company or just kind of as a curious individual, where can they find you, and what's the best way?
Probably the best way right now is LinkedIn.
Okay.
Search me on LinkedIn, Scot Hays, Hays. No E in there. So
Important to say that. Yeah. 2 T's. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 T's. Synergistic Systems, HC.com is our website. And HC is for human capital.
Okay.
Right. So
I was going to ask that earlier. I forgot.
Yeah. So those are the best ways to get a hold of me. Really what I like to do is as people reach out to me, I'll send them the PI. So that one, I can understand them, but two, that they can see what it does and the power and the impact that it can have for self-awareness and for organizations.
I appreciated that taste test, and I know some other people that have as well that you've sent it to.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great business tool for you, and it's helping. It's like a dual purpose. It's like you're helping people at the same time, whether or not they work with you.
Yeah. And ultimately for me, I just like helping people.
Yeah.
Right. And
I've seen it over and over.
yeah, like doing networking events, hosting events, whatever I can do to help people. And I guess it's the connector of people is what I like to do. And doing events like that where I introduce people who don't necessarily know each other, but I know them, and I'm like, ooh, there's going to be good synergy here because I know how they're wired. So that's fun for me watching people do that.
I can see that. I have a similarly wired, I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're close.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
and
thanks for having me.
We'll see you guys next time.
They tell me that I'm never gonna make